Lady from District 18.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to debate in opposition to the bill.
The lady has the floor.
Thank you. All of you, I want to urge you today not to turn this bill into something it's not. Please don't, in your own minds, turn this bill into a litmus test on whether you do or don't fully support the Second Amendment or the right to bear arms under the Idaho Constitution. This bill is very much not that. The very most conservative members of the Supreme Court, as you know, Scalia, Alito, Thomas, and Roberts, have all upheld the idea that the restrictions on guns in school are legitimate and fully supported under the Second Amendment. Idaho courts have also found that restrictions on guns in school are legitimate and allowed under the Idaho Constitution, which is more generous to gun rights even than the Second Amendment. So we're really not here to talk about the parameters of any constitution. This is really just a question of policy, and really it's just a question of policy of how do we make our institutions of higher learning in Idaho be the very best and the very safest that they can be. Now, looking at it as it should be looked at from a question of policy, I believe this bill is extremely bad policy, and I am hoping will be rejected today. It was crafted with no input from anybody in the education community. No university was consulted. No one responsible for campus security was consulted. The State Board of Education was not consulted. No real studies were conducted with respect to Idaho education and whether this would, in fact, in any way improve the security system in Idaho schools. And there was really no data. Now, we saw this chart today indicating that violent crime rates went down in Utah after the implementation of their allowance of guns on campus. But if you look at federal statistics, you'll see that the rates of violent crime went down nationwide at about the exact same rate. That we're at the lowest violent crime rate nationwide that we've been since 1960. And in fact, those rates dropped by about a third during this same period. So I don't think we can really attribute anything to what happened with respect to guns on campus one way or the other. But I certainly don't think we can look to these graphs and say, great, if we allow guns on campus, we'll see a drop in crime. I think there's no data to support a connection there. So, we look at the fiscal note. Let's start there on this bill. Now, the fiscal note on this bill says innocently enough that it has a de minimis impact. Nothing to see here, folks. No real fiscal impact to worry about. But I think this note is just a symptom of the problem here. It's a symptom of the fact that no real stakeholders were consulted in the development of this bill. Because if anybody had talked to anybody that was actually responsible for campus security, they would have learned of a very different number. Now, if you look at tab A in the handout that I sent out, it includes a fiscal impact estimate from the 8 public colleges and universities across Idaho. And if you look at that and you add all those numbers up from each of the colleges, you'll see that they total to approximately $4.4 million per year on an annual recurring basis, year after year, extra expense that we are saddling our colleges and universities with. Now, in addition to that, you'll see that there's about another $400,000 in one-time costs that we're inflicting. Now, if anything, these numbers are low, because if you look through the package, you'll see that no number was actually submitted for the University of Idaho. They just indicated that there would be substantial costs that are impossible to measure at this time. So really, the number is probably closer to $5 million per year that we're sticking our public colleges and universities with. Where are they going to find this money? This bill sure doesn't provide it. Now, we're trying to recover from a crisis in education funding already, and this really seems to be moving in the wrong direction. We should be giving more money to our schools. We shouldn't be giving them this financial kick in the shins with no money to cover these anticipated extra costs. So I would put to you this moves fiscally certainly very much in the wrong direction from a policy perspective. They're going to have to pull this money out of their existing programs. They're going to have to pull this money out of professor salaries and out of operating funds, out of the money that they have to put on student athletics. Is that really what we want to be doing here as a body? To be here sucking money away from our institutions of higher learning? And what's the justification for this financial kneecapping of our public colleges? I mean, it's really this, the general ideological objective of allowing more people to defend themselves with firearms in more places, whether the communities there want them or not. Now, many of you say there's merit to that objective. Maybe there's merit to having some people feel more secure as they walk across campus. But is that merit enough to balance out what we're looking to do here today? Is that worth $4.5 to $5 million per year that we're going to be sucking out of our colleges? Now, that gets me to the next issue of why this bill is not a good policy decision for our institutions of higher learning. Now, this bill not only strikes a financial blow at our colleges and universities, but it strikes a moral blow at them. So if we pass this bill, we're sending a message of disregard and contempt to our university administrators, who have made clear in no uncertain terms that they are unanimously opposed to this. Now, these are, I would put to you, the real stakeholders. And when I say real stakeholders, I mean the people whose job it is, day in, day out, to make decisions about how to make their campus the best and safest place that it can be. By stakeholders, I mean many of the law enforcement personnel whose job it is to show up at a scene and figure out which of the people with a gun at the scene is the actual bad guy that they have to take out. When I mean stakeholders, I mean the professors that have to give out bad grades to people sometimes and then have to stand in front of a room full of students, some of whom may be very angry, some of whom may have had too much to drink the night before or even perhaps earlier that day. I mean the students, I mean the people that will actually be hit with a bullet in the tragic event that somebody actually goes berserk and starts firing on a campus. These are the people that would be shot, and they have come and spoken to us in no uncertain terms and said that they are deeply, deeply opposed to this bill. Now, at some point, the folks charged with campus security may change their minds. They may see the data provided, and they may decide, you know what, we actually would be better off. We would be safer if people carried guns on campus. Under the current law, they can do that. They can make the decisions about how to make their campuses as safe as possible. After SB 1254 were passed, they would lose that ability. This would strip them of the ability to make those decisions about the safety of their campus. And I would put to you that these are the people that are the closest to the facts, that are the closest to the community, and are the ones that we should really be entrusting with these key decisions about how best to secure the campus. Now, certainly you can point to some in the community. We've heard that there was a letter from the sheriffs and the Fraternal Order of Police. There's some division amongst law enforcement, but I think there's really not much question that the vast majority of stakeholders are deeply opposed to this bill. And you know who opposes it, and I've included some of the letters in your packet. All 8 of Idaho's public college and university presidents, the entire State Board of Education, who were appointed by a Republican governor, the chiefs of police, as Dr. Custer testified in committee, the vast majority of the 22,000 students down the road at BSU. And I believe, I know the speaker has also received a petition with 3,000 signatures of people opposing this. There is a vast outcry against this bill, and the vast majority is coming from the people who are on these campuses, who are the most deeply and imminently affected. And the position that these stakeholders have taken is pretty justifiable, and I certainly think it's not so crazy that the legislature needs to swoop in and trump their decision. There's not a crime or violence problem on our campuses right now. In fact, the violent crime rate is lower on our campuses than it is off of our campuses. So there's no crisis here that we need to respond to with this draconian measure. There are other reasons for having this. As I said, there's alcohol abuse on campuses. There's drug abuse on campuses. There are people angry about getting bad grades. There's academic pressure. There's social pressure. There are young children on campuses. There are child care centers on campuses. My children have been attending programs on BSU's campus since they were 6 years old, and this would personally cause me some concern. I've also heard from a lot of folks that this presents recruiting problems. I've received a flood of emails personally from professors and employees at BSU who fear for their personal safety, and some have even gone so far as to say they would seek jobs in other states if this goes through. Our coaches have said this will make it more difficult to recruit top athletes. This is an operational problem that we are causing for our institutions of higher learning by doing this. And, if we're going to train the workforce of tomorrow that we all dream of, it's going to be our professors that do this. It's largely, the heavy lifting is going to be by those folks. Why do we want to put them in fear for their lives just to make an abstract ideological statement? This is deeply upsetting to these folks, and it could lose us some really good people. And I have not seen a compelling policy rationale to go there. Other states know this. The vast majority of states don't allow firearms on their public university campuses. The private sector knows this. All the private universities and campus restrict firearms on their campuses. They know that it's not good for safety, and it's not good for recruiting and keeping top talent. We've also heard a little bit about the open carry question. I think there is some question about this. Some of the top legal minds in our state believe that this law could open the door to open carry on our campuses, including the dean of the University of Idaho Law School and the general counsel of Micron, who are certainly 2 of the top legal minds in our state. Take all the recruiting problems that I just described and all the feelings of safety concerns and multiply them by 1,000. If you've got a student who's sitting in a class staring at their professor with a semi-automatic rifle strapped across their chest, and there is some concern that this bill could put us in a position of being the first state in the country that allows open carry on a campus. Again, I don't know how this would play out in court. It could go either way. I'm not here to make a legal position, but there's certainly room to argue that, and certainly some top legal minds have. And it's just another of the many reasons why we should not take this step today. So in conclusion, we have professional educators and administrators whose job it is to do this analysis. And they've done a really good job. And they've done a great job as educators. They've made very safe campuses around the state, and they've done a great job of recruiting top talent and providing a top quality education. And if it ain't broke, why are we trying to fix it? And this sure isn't fixing it. I think this is actually creating a very big problem that we didn't have before. They've made a policy decision on how to run their community, and I see no reason to throw it out the window and take that decision away from them. There's been no data, no sound rationale to take this measure and override our educators on a matter that is of such profound importance to them. As I noted at the outset, this bill also carries a hidden cost of millions of dollars every year, and sends a message of contempt to our university administrators. And the reasons to oppose this bill are many, and they are very heavy. And I think the reasons put it in opposition to it are sort of more abstract and generally ideological, and I don't think they tip the scale. So I would ask you all and that we owe it to our education community to move beyond party divisions and to really look at what this is going to do to our schools. And so I would ask you again not to view this as a Second Amendment litmus test, but rather to view this as a test of how do we stand up for our educators and for our educational communities. I ask you to reject this bill.
Is there further debate? For what purpose does the good lady rise?
I rise to debate a second time against the bill.
Does anyone wish to debate the bill for the first time? The lady has the floor to debate for the second time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would urge you all not to get too carried away with stories, however heart-wrenching, of particular instances of victimization. We need to look at this from an overarching perspective and look at the data as a whole. There are anecdotes that people could cite on either side of things. At the tragic shooting in Tucson, where Congresswoman Gabrielle Giffords was shot, there were actually several concealed weapons holders at the scene, and one of them nearly shot the person trying to subdue the shooter because there was such confusion and mayhem that he thought it was the wrong person and nearly augmented the tragedy by shooting the wrong person. So having more weapons on the scene is not necessarily a recipe for limiting the tragedy. It can very much increase the tragedy. Even in a scenario where we're envisioning a lone woman walking home at night, it's just as likely that her assailant could have a gun and, again, increase the scope of the tragedy. So I would urge you to look away from kind of single one-off scenarios and think about what would happen if this person had a gun. That can really cut either way, and we really need to be taking a much bigger picture policy approach to this. Thank you.